Hello everyone. If you like this audiobook and want to listen to more, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, like it as well, that it enjoy.
One awakening. Darkness was all he could see. Darkness was all he was met with. Darkness was all he understood. Maybe it was fitting for someone like him, having committed the sin of tampering with thousands of people's souls to end this cursed cycle. Not even being worthy of passing on into the cycle of reincarnation. What was he supposed to do now, with an eternity of time to spend with his own thoughts? People would go insane if left alone with nothing but their own thoughts and no external stimuli. Sorry Gramps, I couldn't really keep my promise to you. It would be next to an impossible task to still find anyone alive with a semblance of a positive attitude towards him after what he did. I've lived for long enough, some rest would be nice. These were the last thoughts drifting in the mind of Yuji Itadori before a blast of all his senses assaulted him. He could smell the most delicious and fragrant food, before it shifted into a putrid and acrid scent, constantly flipping back and forth with no rhyme or reason. His nerves throughout his body stung and fired off every millisecond, feeling as though tiny pricks danced along his body and then shifting to him feeling as though molten fire was dripping throughout his entire being. The crackle of noise assaulted him from every direction, loud, soft, quiet, rambunctious, screeching, singing, laughing, crying, slurring, moaning, gasping, shrieking, 1,000 overlapping sounds of living and dying that crashed together all at once. What felt like an eternity of agony and pleasure coursing through his body quickly vanished, just as fast as it had abruptly appeared. What he felt next was a rough surface laying beneath him, and the smell of damp air. Opening his eyes slowly, he noticed just how dark the environment around him was, with his eyes quickly adjusting. What the hell, Yuji muttered out, before groaning with a muffled grunt as a migraine assaulted him. On instinct, he channeled his reverse curse technique and alleviated the symptoms, letting out a breath of relief, mentally thanking Ieri for that little life hack she loved to abuse. Can't remember the last time I had a migraine. Where the hell am I? He slowly sat up, resting his arm on his lifted knee as he took in his surroundings. All he could see was a huge room, with the floors and walls made of jagged black rocks. There was no form of life he could see in the room, only the large desolate ground stretching towards the walls of what he assumed to be the cave that he was in. Letting out a sigh, Yuji slowly stood up effortlessly, which gave him a slight pause. Last he remembered, it had been over 200 years since he was able to stand without his knees and back cracking up a storm. Looking down at his body, he noticed he was wearing his usual outfit, a silver reflective hooded jacket. It helped to keep his identity more low-key. Even after hundreds of years, he still opted for the same style. Why fix what wasn't broken? Stretching his neck, he looked around and slowly tried to piece together what was happening. I should have been dead already. My body turned into a cursed tool. I definitely didn't possess somebody else, so why am I still alive? Lifting his hand, he watched as it was engulfed with his cursed energy, feeling as though he was back in his prime with the amount he possessed. Seems like everything is still here, and better than ever. He muttered to himself before searching his pockets, but was left disappointed. Of course, I have my clothes back but not my phone, just my luck. Scanning his surroundings one more time, he slightly narrowed his eyes and spotted an opening on one of the sides of the cave, leading to God knows where. Well, anywhere is better than here. With that, he began walking towards the opposite side of the huge room he was in. Lifting the hood behind his head, he covered himself, letting his face be shrouded by his jacket. Whatever kind of cave this is, it sure is massive. It should be at least hundreds of meters across. Looking up, he could see the ceiling stretched up even higher as well. Hands in his pockets, Yuji walked about halfway across the room before stopping abruptly. That was when a low rumbling started to shake the ground beneath his feet. Looking down, he could see the little pebbles near his shoes dance across the rough surface, skittering around lightly. But it slowly grew more chaotic, the pebbles bouncing around across his shoes and a few feet away as the rumbling grew more and more. Doesn't feel like an earthquake, definitely not a cursed spirit either, I would have noticed one by now. A mining operation, with how desperate people were getting to find a new fuel source, it wouldn't surprise him if people were digging anywhere to find a trickle of something. However, that theory only lasted for a fraction of a second as the rumbling grew louder and more chaotic. Several pieces of the rocks along the ceiling fell down and crashed around the cave. Definitely not a mining operation, Yuji said as his eyes tracked to the epicenter of where the rumbling seemed to originate and grow from. The ground started to crack beneath his feet, causing him to hop slightly to the left as the earth split and fissured out like a disorganized spiderweb. Slowly, the ground bulged out from the center of the cave as something large seemed to be forcing itself out. The dark figure rose up from the ground, rising higher and higher as piles of rock and debris fell from its body, leaving large dust plumes to spread from below its body. Looking up, Yuji calmly assessed whatever it was in front of him. A large, imposing figure that grew to almost the height of the cave. It had an upper body similar to a human's, with two large black arms on either side of its body resting on the ground helping to support its body. Large, bone-like blades jutted out along the forearms of the monster. Its lower body was larger than the rest of it, extended behind the monster like a long tail, sporting the same bone protrusions along the back of its frame which climbed up the back towards its head. On top of its head was a singular red eye, staring straight down at Yuji with a malice he was used to seeing directed at him. The monster slowly opened its maw, revealing jagged, sharp teeth as it let out a deafening roar. Gra-o-or-r-r-r-r. The roar caused the cave to shake even more, but the force of its breath pushed away all the accumulating dust that had gathered around its body. Narrowing his eyes, Yuji slowly took his hand out of his pocket but froze as he saw the ground around the monster slowly crack open as numerous bodies dragged itself out of the ground. From what he could tell, at least 100 new monsters climbed out of the ground, standing in front of the large one-eyed monster like its minions. These new monsters had heads resembling goats, bipedal and were carrying large clubs. The only thing Yuji could put a resemblance to these new monsters on were minotaurs. A tense silence grew in the room as both sides stood still. Yuji, deep in thought, trying to figure out what these monsters were since they didn't have a trace of cursed energy within them. The monsters stayed back, waiting for the first move as the horde of minotaur-looking beasts tensely shuffled their hooves and grip on their weapons. These monsters had one instinctive drive within them, it was to appease the larger monster behind them and to kill. However, at this moment they hesitated to make the first move. As monsters, their senses and instincts were sharper than that of most races, especially once born in the dungeon. They longed for the surface and never hesitated to kill humans they came across in the dungeon. Yet they stood still. The pure feeling of malice and dread that was contained in the human in front of them gave them pause. They didn't know why, they couldn't comprehend why a human could possess such malice and dread inside their body. The large monster behind the horde, Balur, also hesitated. It had killed countless adventurers delving deep into the dungeons, trying to reach deeper past its territory. Some might have given it trouble in the past, but they were always in large groups intending to push their way past itself. Yet, this one human alone seemed different than anything it had encountered in the past. It was an insult to its very being, an embarrassment that it would ever hesitate in front of a human. With a loud roar, Balur raised its right arm and slammed it on the ground beside itself, killing a dozen or so of its own allies, but the horde of monsters didn't care. They all collectively roared and started charging forward, eyes gleaming red as their hooves left behind deep imprints into the ground from the force of their charge. Balur started charging forward behind them towards Yuji, reaching its arms up into the sky and intending to crush the human beneath it. "Just so you know, you attacked first." Balur could barely hear the words the human spoke out, reaching its ears. Its singular eye narrowed as it watched the human take its hands out of its pockets. Yuji raised his right hand, stretching two fingers towards the horde of monsters and Balur behind them, his eyes dead calm and lacking any semblance of emotion behind them. Dismantle. Jiakai. Author's note. Quick note here, going forward I'm not 100% sure yet which variation of the cursed techniques I should go with when displaying them in text. I'll expand more on it at the end. A tense silence stretched out for a second, before an invisible wave passed throughout the room. That was the last thing the monsters heard before their bodies split apart into dozens of pieces, crashing into a pile of gore before slowly dissipating into the air. Balur itself stood still before its vision split into 2, then 4, then 8 and more. Its entire body was sliced apart before bursting into a black ashy blast, leaving behind a large glowing rock on the ground. They disappeared just like cursed spirits, but these rocks, Yuji lowered his hood and stepped to where the monsters had died, looking at the pool of blood gathered along the ground. Cursed spirits leave nothing behind when they die. These monsters disappeared just like cursed spirits, but they left behind rocks. Yuji thought to himself as he saw the 100 or so of glowing rocks left behind in the wake of his attack in place of the monsters' bodies. Picking one up, he tossed it into the air a few times, feeling the hefty weight in them despite the size. This is just like dungeon quests or the RPGs I used to play. He couldn't help but compare them to the games he played in the past, which became fewer and fewer after a certain finger was consumed. Not like I can carry these with me anyway. Especially that one. He pocketed the one rock he was carrying before turning to the huge one left behind by the large one-eyed monster. Quote, I probably shouldn't, but, to hell with it. After having a small internal battle, he walked up to the rock and placed his hand onto its glowing and smooth surface. Within a second, numerous outlines of scissors expanded outwards and covered the surface of the rock. Shing! The glowing rock was quickly sliced apart into tiny pieces, scattering all over the ground as they crumpled away from Yuji. If I can't have it, no one can. Can't have anyone stealing my loot. Yuji joked to himself, putting on an indignant look before chuckling it away. He patted the rock in his pockets before turning and walking on towards the opening in the wall once more, putting the hood of his jacket over his head. Well, since I'm in a cave, the only way out is up, of course. And so Yuji set his trajectory, reaching the opening of the cave and seeing a path that slowly led up. Still without a clue as to where he was, he didn't spend too long pondering on it and instead just wanted to get out first and foremost. Besides, how long would it even take to get out of a cave? Ch.2 Encounter. A few hours had passed since Yuji's ascent of the dungeon. He didn't know how many floors he had gone up by now, but the environment kept on changing, which was extremely confusing to him. The moment he left the room with the big-ass monster and the horde of goats, he thought he was somehow trapped inside of a volcano. The walls, ground and ceiling are all colored burning red with distorted rocks strewn across the floor. The walls bore black cracks, making it seem to have been carbonized as a faint red light shone from between the cracks, giving off an eerie presence. Probably lava flowing between the walls. Did someone really bury me beneath a volcano? Yuji couldn't help but complain to no one but himself. Even as he kept ascending, different types of monsters kept appearing, a particular type of rock monster covered in fire. One simple dismantle was enough to dispatch the monsters the moment they appeared. After killing them, each dropped the same rock he had seen. However, he had noticed he was seeing less and less of these monsters. He even spotted a cluster of them scurrying off away from him at some point, but made no effort to chase them down. I'm almost expecting Jago to pop his head out at some point. Yuji muttered to himself as he kicked aside one of the glowing rocks. It almost seemed like he wasn't making any progress with how long he's been walking. At least he wasn't completely alone, as the rock monsters kept appearing from behind corners to try and ambush him. Rounding a corner, Yuji paused and lifted an eyebrow, seeing a crumpled leather bag on the ground which he could spot as a dried patch of blood under it, some staining the very same leather bag it sat on. Walking over, he kicked the bag over, knocking it down onto its side as the flap swung open. A few of those glowing rocks rolled out onto the ground, along with some stale-looking food, what he assumed to be a canteen of water judging by its shape and size, as well as a piece of rolled-up paper. Crouching down, he picked up the roll of paper first, noticing how it was brown and rough compared to the normal smooth white pieces of paper he was used to. Unfurling it, he frowned as he glanced over the unfamiliar text scribbled onto the paper. It sort of looks like English, but not at the same time. I really should have learned more languages besides Japanese and English, Yuji muttered as he rolled the paper back up, putting it back into the bag as he lifted the whole thing up by its strap. Slinging the strap over his shoulder, he reached in and grabbed the canteen of water, shaking it around. Seems like less than half is left in this. Taking the lid off, he smelled the canteen first, and not noticing anything took a sip. Yay, just water, lucky me. Taking 2 generous gulps, he sealed the canteen and put it back into the bag, leaving just a little bit of water left for another drink. Just as he was about to continue on, he froze, his ears twitching slightly as the faint yells of people shouting entered his ears, followed by the sounds of weapons clashing against something. A friend of yours? Yuji asked the dried pile of blood on the floor before making his way towards the commotion. Let's scope things out first. His body stuck close to the sides of the walls as he hid himself in the shadows. Stay together. Damn it, Bet, stop charging off to the side by yourself. You think I have a choice? These flame rocks keep swarming towards us. Move the injured back, let Riveria heal them. Captain, there's more arg. Utter chaos could be described to the scene that was playing out right now. One moment, the Loki familia were on an expedition towards the lower floors, helping the lower leveled in their party to gain more experience with prolonged expeditions. But then they were charged by what could be described as a tidal wave of flame rocks swarming them. The goal of their expedition was to trailblaze unexplored areas of the dungeons, but before pushing beyond floor 50 and towards floor 59, they had a quest to complete. It was one issued by the Dian sect familia to collect a large amount of water from the Cadmus springs on floor 51. Yet, they were already being halted on floor 44 by the absurd wave of flame rocks. Finn, Apalum and the captain of the Loki familia and the one in charge of this expedition gritted his teeth as he quickly thrust his spear into the flame rock that had crushed the legs of one of their frontline members. "I got him," Gareth shouted out. A heavily built dwarf and top executive of the Loki familia reached out and grabbed the injured man, pulling him back as another frontliner took his place with a heavy shield, blocking another flame rock from charging forward. Everyone was fighting, whether they wanted to or not, as the flame rocks numbered in the hundreds, filling out the tight corridor and cavern with their large, flaming bodies. "Captain, there's too many of them," Tion shouted as she kicked back a flame rock and stuck close to Finn. "Ha, it doesn't matter, we'll just cut them down." Tiona swung her large double-bladed sword around, slicing apart the monsters as they tried to climb over one another. "At least she isn't going off on her own," Finn tiredly muttered, looking to the side and seeing Ace staying back, killing each monster that tried to get past her. Usually this wave of monsters wouldn't have been an issue for them, but the swarm of monsters never stopped for 3 hours straight. Ever since they stepped onto this floor, they kept coming up and running into the Loki familia like a never-ending flood. Each member of the Loki familia was strong, especially the higher-level members, but even these people needed rest after hours of constant fighting. "Riveria," Finn turned and shouted to his high-elf vice-captain and the few mages next to her, "We need another barrage. WWE can only handle another, before mine down hits us," a mage next to Riveria uttered out, his robe tattered and covered with dirt with splotches of blood. "Two can do it, maybe," Lefia meekly spoke out, breathing out heavily as the exhaustion was slowly building up on her body and mind. Riviera bit her lip, "Buy us some time for our chant." She held her staff up, the other mages nearby looking unsure but quickly steeling themselves as they began concentrating alongside her. "You heard her, buy her some time," Finn ordered out. Bet, Tiona and Aze each quickly took the initiative to charge forward, cutting and smashing down each of the monsters in front of them, pushing them back slightly. However, for every monster killed, another quickly piled in and took its place. "Tisk, annoying damn bugs." Bet swung his arm up, launching a flame rock over and across the length of the corridor. "These are rocks, actually," Gareth shouted and joined in from behind, swinging his sword and sending 4 of the monsters flying back, watching as they turned into black ash midair. "Good, we might just buy enough time, but my thumb has been tingling more and more these past few minutes," Finn thought to himself as he saw the rest of his party slowly push the horde of monsters back to give time for Riveria and the mages to set up their chant. However, his thoughts were cut short when the wall behind them burst apart and more flame rocks appeared. "Damn it, watch out," Finn shouted towards Riveria and the mages, jumping back past them and quickly swinging his spear to cut down the new monsters. Crash! Another wall broke down right next to Finn, causing him to sidestep out of the way as dozens more flame rocks poured out. "What's going on? Why is the dungeon being so aggressive? I've never seen them swarm out of the walls or rush out like an unending tide." Gripping his spear tightly, he stayed calm and analyzed the situation as Gareth moved back to help support his captain, holding the back from swarming towards Riveria and the mages. "You ready yet?" Gareth shouted as he used his body to push back the new swarm of monsters from reaching their mages. Opening her eyes, Riveria lifted her staff up as the mages followed suit. Her lips parted as she began to shout out, before being interrupted. Senketsu, piercing blood. A sense of dread filled Riveria as her enhanced senses picked up on something sharp careening towards their group. "Watch out!" Her eyes full of panic, the chant of magic being interrupted as it fizzled out, the other mages failing to uphold their own as they turned to her in confusion and alertness from her words. Finn glanced back and saw the look in her eyes, but before he could react, the sound of flesh and rock being pierced filled his ears. Numerous thin, but thick, red beams with a tip shaped like an arrow flew through the monsters and between the members of the Loki familia. A hole the size of a Finn's fist would be left behind each time the beams pierced one of the flame rocks. Each monster pierced would seize for a moment, before completely dissipating into black ash. Then, one by one, they all disappeared into a puff of smoke, their bodies leaving behind countless magic stones clattering onto the ground and the odd-numbered Kainseki item here and there. Kainseki, a crimson-colored drop item from the monster flame rock that can explode when exposed to fire. What happened? Gareth muttered, still holding his weapon up, his eyes slowly looking around at the magic stones on the ground, towards the other members of his party, and then towards Finn. That wasn't you, was it? Bet said, oddly staying calm but his tense expression betraying him as the switch from pure fighting chaos into still calmness threw him off. Tion and Tiona turned to Riveria, with Ace sporting an odd yet apprehensive look on her face, also wanting some answers as they slowly walked back to the rest of their party. Our Riveria, Lefia muttered out, unsure of what to make of the situation. No, it was not. I'm not sure what it was, but magic of this scale is. Her brows tightened as she turned to look down the end of the corridor, clutching her staff tightly in her hand. And it came from that direction. The rest noticed and turned, their weapons up and ready as the rest of the expedition reorganized themselves quickly without needing the command from Finn. The sound of footsteps slowly creeped towards them, as the figure of a man wearing strange clothing gradually appeared and approached them, his hands in his pockets. Finn narrowed his eyes, pushing his way to the front of the group slightly as Riveria followed next to him. Her next words made him flinch. I don't sense anything from him. Nothing. He nodded back and coughed to clear his throat, causing the man approaching them to stop a fair distance away. With the faint lighting throughout the dungeon's floor, they couldn't make out the appearance of this person, especially with the hood covering his head. I presume we have you to thank for clearing out the horde of flame rocks. The Loki familia will be sure to reward and compensate you for your assistance. Finn spoke out towards the man standing still in front of them. However, the man didn't reply back, merely looking at their group. From the man's perspective, Yuji was left with even more confusion than answers. He expected to find people fighting, sure. Fighting these monsters was also another point he expected. But that all changed when he saw the blonde child order the others about while fighting. There was the literal wolfman standing among the group, sporting what he assumed to be dog ears and a tail. The stocky man with the beard also looked like a dwarf from the movies he'd seen. There were even elves among the group, as he noticed their ears and appearance. Elves did have the stereotype of being beautiful, handsome after all. There was also the fact that they all fought at varying levels of skills and prowess, with some having more finesse and power behind their attacks and others more reckless and swinging left and right. Not only that, he could actually understand what they were saying, since they were speaking Japanese. I activate my binding vow, lazy writing. I ain't dealing with that BS. I watched Danamchi with Japanese voice acting, so they speak Japanese, easy peasy. He was roused out of his thoughts as the child and the green-haired elf stepped forward once more. I'm Finn Diam, captain of the Loki familia. This is Riveria, my vice-captain, also belonging to the Loki familia. Could you tell us your name? The child, Finn, spoke towards him, but from the look he could see in his eyes, Yuji could tell he was far more mature than what his appearance was letting on. Yuji Itadori, author's note. Didn't want to drag out the chapters of Yuji just stumbling through the dungeon by himself for too long, as I felt that would be pretty boring and sap my own motivation to write those parts on. Ch3. Fiacal discussion. He spoke out, giving them his real name. It was a way to find out if they recognized it. However, Finn waited for a moment, as though expecting Yuji to say something else before nodding. We were planning on heading up to floor 50 and setting up our base camp there. Seeing as you came from that direction, I assume you're coming back from the deeper floors. Finn spoke out, turning to the rest of his party and signaling with his hand for them to stand down. They all complied with relief, with the exception of Bet, who couldn't help but stand tense the entire time, staring at Yuji. A's was no exception, except her case was more towards the strength of the magic he had showcased, wondering just how strong this man before them really was. Floor 50, Yuji thought to himself, reflecting on the words Finn spoke out. Wait, don't tell me this is an actual dungeon. Did I get isekai'd or transported to a different world? He wasn't unaware of the various shows and manga of people dying and reincarnating in a different world, most commonly a fantasy world filled with magic. He just never expected it to actually be real and to be happening to him. Hold on, I have a quick question. Yuji raised his hand towards Finn. How old are you? Finn stood still for a moment, unsure of what to make of this situation, being asked of his age all of a sudden. He then frowned slightly, assuming Yuji was viewing him as a child rather than a palom. Before he could interject however, someone else already did so. What kind of question is that to be asking, boss? Tion, the Amazoness, yelled out as she pushed past the other members of the party, a hand on her hip as she pointed towards Yuji. Don't you know it's rude to ask a palom their age? And not only that, you make it sound like you're treating our captain like a child. Who do you think yo MMPHH? MPHH. She was quickly stopped and dragged back by her sister, Tiona and Gareth, back behind the rest of their party out of view. Sai, I assume you have a good reason to be asking me that, but I'm over 40 years old. Finn let out an exasperated sigh after seeing Tion's actions. Since you asked me for my age, I'll add that I'm of the palom race. We all are short, but don't mistake that for weakness. Right, sorry, just had to confirm something. Yuji rubbed the side of his head in frustration, practically confirming his suspicions. He couldn't help but think if he was in some knockoff Lord of the Rings. Look, I'll be honest with you. I'm lost right now on where I'm currently at. If you don't mind, could you point me in the right direction out of here? You're telling me someone like you ends up beyond floor 40 and is somehow lost? Yay, I don't buy it, not one bit. Bet interjected in, stepping forward, his body tensed and his fists clenched, ready for a fight. Bet, stop and move back. Sorry captain, something about this guy doesn't seem right. My senses and instincts are going crazy right now ever since he appeared. Bet said calmly as Finn tried to get him to pull back. Yuji merely sighed, look, I don't want any trouble. Just point me to the path out of here and I'll be on my way. Hell no, something's off about you. I don't know what it is, but my body can't decide between wanting to run off or fight right now ever since you showed up. You haven't even told us what damn familia you're from either. Bet lowered his body slightly, assuming his fighting stance. The rest of the party was more surprised by the fact that Bet readily admitted he was ready to run off, compared to his usual loud boasting. He was a level 5 adventurer, and could be considered as one of the strongest fighters in Orario, yet he seemed to be shaken by the person in front of them. Aza's grip on her weapon tightened, her eyes narrowing towards Yuji, but not with the resolve to fight, but rather to find out just how strong this man was and if it would give her a hint towards becoming stronger herself. Why does everything always come down to fighting? Yuji muttered to himself, taking his hands out of his pockets and shifting his body sideways. Finn frowned, and before he could order Bet to stand down, the man had already sprinted across the corridor and closed in on Yuji, his right leg suspended in the air and crashing down towards Yuji's head. Damn it Bet, you're level 5. We don't know what his level is. Finn shouted after Bet, before signaling for Tion and Tiona to run forward to subdue Bet before things could escalate any further, with Ace following behind. However, before they could do so, Yuji raised his right hand and grabbed onto the leg that was swinging down towards him. The impact shook the corridor and the ground beneath them, cracking the earth and splitting it apart, causing them to sink slightly. I knew it, I had a feeling. Bet spat out, and just as he was about to retract his leg, he felt Yuji's grip around his leg tightened, forcing him to let out a cry of pain as the right mithril boot he had on, Flovert, cracked under his hand. Wow. Yuji didn't answer him, and instead, pulled Bet down, letting go of his leg as Bet's body suspended in the air in front of Yuji. Grit your teeth. Yuji then swung his left hand forward, clenched into a fist. That was the moment his fist impacted Bet's midsection. Kokusen, black flash. A flash of red and black exploded out from the point of impact, spreading out and covering the sides of the corridor. The sound of the punch was like a cannon going off as Bet's body was catapulted back and away from Yuji at incredible speeds. Gah! Bet yelled out, his eyes rolling back as his body flew towards Ace, Tion and Tiona. Ace quickly stepped out of the way, but this led to Bet's body crashing and skipping along the ground, straight into Tion and Tiona, making them fall back down into a heap. Bah! Puha! Tion and Tiona crumpled down beneath Bet's unconscious body. The rest of the party stared at their form and Bet, before turning to look at Yuji. Ace herself had always stared at Yuji, never turning back, her eyes locked on and fierce. Yuji was ready to fight once again, but seeing the look in her eyes, he could tell she wasn't looking to fight. It was more like she wanted to know something from him, seeking an answer. Great, now we have deadweight we have to carry forward. Finn sighed as he walked towards Yuji, with Rivria shaking her head to go and check Bet's condition, knowing he wasn't dead but to check the extent of the damage. I have to apologize on behalf of Bet as his captain. I couldn't restrain my own party member and risked harm befalling onto you. How would you like to accompany us instead to floor 50 where we can have a proper conversation? We can help bring you out after we're done with our expedition. Finn diplomatically suggested to Yuji, who was going to refuse, but was interrupted as Finn added on. Since you mentioned being lost, I can't in good faith let you venture back up by yourself. Floor 37, the White Palace, is a giant labyrinth. Without sufficient knowledge of the layout, you could be lost for weeks. We have plenty of supplies as well, we would be more than willing to share some with you. Finn gestured towards the large supply bags on the ground and backs of some of the support party members, before nodding down to the empty look bag hanging by Yuji's side. Yuji thought for a moment before nodding, you make some good points. I'll tag along for now. Finn smiled and reached his hand out, I'll be looking forward to your company, Yuji Itadori. Yuji stared at the hand before reaching out, noticing the size difference between the two at such a short distance. Likewise. Ch.4 Safety Point. I have to admit, I didn't really believe you when you said you broke the Balur's magic stone. Well, things happened. Yuji stood next to Finn, who couldn't help but look at the sliced pieces of the magic stone that belonged to the Balur, the floor boss of floor 49. After their introductions, the Loki familia along with Yuji spent the next few hours coming back up and finding very little resistance in the monsters that came after. They did see the traces of magic stones left behind by Yuji on the ground, as well as the Kanseki item the flame rocks dropped. Finn had proposed a deal to Yuji beforehand, agreeing to carry the excess magic stones from the prolonged fight before and the others that were found left by Yuji along the way down. They would be taking a cut of the profits made from the magic stones and items in return for collecting and carrying it for him. Not seeing any reason to refuse, Yuji allowed them to do so. There was no point in haggling right now when he didn't even know what kind of world he was in. The support members of the Loki familia stepped forward and began picking up the pile of magic stones left by the Balur and Fonwar Yuji had killed hours prior. Wind magic? Riveria asked out loud, not directly looking at Yuji but merely staring at the sliced magic stones. She also glanced at the far wall that had signs of gashes carved into the rock face. Sure, Yuji cryptically answered before turning to walk away. Riviera frowned at his parting back, with Finn merely sighing. Look, you can't just keep staring daggers at his back. Aze is already about to bear a hole through him with how intense her gaze has been. He tilted his head to glance behind Riveria. Aze stood off to the side, her hand on her sheathed sword as she kept staring at Yuji with a blank look on her face. The entire time they had been walking together, she had kept silent, staying near the back of the party and staring at the party's newest addition. You saw the same thing as I did, Riveria merely stated, glancing at Aze before looking down at Finn. Not once in my entire life have I ever seen or heard of magic as what we witnessed during the fight with the flame rocks. Then there was that flash of black lightning as well when he struck Bet. The pair turned back towards the two random frontline party members that were carrying Bet on a stretcher, a large bruise having formed on his midsection. They had decided not to waste any elixirs on him, his own healing should be enough. Lefia, who had been listening in, meekly stepped forward, standing next to Riveria, whispering out. There was no chant, unless what he said counted as one. Her head hung low, but she kept glancing towards Aze from the corner of her eyes. Riveria nodded, but Finn shrugged it off. He has his secret, it's not our job to pry into him and find out who or what he is. We can find out later when we leave the dungeon and ask the guild. For now, our focus is the party's expedition and our quest. Riveria stood silent for before nodding, walking away as Lefia tiptoed back towards Aze, trying to strike up a conversation with the silent but brooding girl. Finn shook his head and ordered the rest of the party to ready up once more, before making their way towards floor 50. He took one last look at the spot where the Balur had supposedly been killed by Yuji, before turning to leave with the rest of his party. As the expedition made its way towards the final steps leading down to floor 50, Yuji noticed the light creeping onto the bottom steps. We're outside. Walking beside him and hearing his words, Gareth laughed slightly but not in a mocking tone. Haha, you really are lost if you can't tell we're coming up on a safety point. Safety point, so a safe zone checkpoint. That's pretty generous of the dungeon. Gareth shrugged, we don't know why these points exist, but monsters don't spawn on these floors at all. By this point of their short time spent traveling together, most members of the Loki familia figured out that Yuji had an extremely lacking knowledge of the dungeon, its layout and the danger it presents. They didn't outright say so or accuse him, but a silent understanding passed between the familia. I bet you'll be wide-eyed with surprise when you see what this floor looks like, Tiona said as she creeped in from the side, crouching down and peering up to try and catch a better glimpse of Yuji's face. A tiny, imperceptible corner of his lips curved upwards as he turned his body slightly, blocking the curious Amazoness's gaze. I've had enough surprises for one lifetime. Tiona pouted and turned back, seeing Ace now staring at her. She gave her a wink and stuck her tongue out before bouncing away towards her sister. Yuji hung back for a moment, letting the rest of the Loki familia pass by him first as they stepped into the light leading into floor 50. So, any reason you're standing here? Yuji turned and glanced down at Ace, standing next to him with her hands still resting on her sheathed sword, staring at him from the corner of her eyes. Quote. All right, we're the last ones, let's head inside. Yuji just wrote her off as being socially awkward with how she carried herself, walking forward into the safety point. Ace hesitated, her hand lifting off her sword for a moment towards him, but stopping, shaking her head and following behind. Stepping onto the new floor, Yuji covered his eyes as the light assaulted him. The shift from dark dimly lit into bright and sunny threw his eyesight off. Getting used to the change, he looked around and was left stunned. They were on a large plateau that rose above the ground below, with grass, trees and flora littering every corner of the floor. There were two more plateaus ahead of them, with the one further away from them having what he assumed to be the entrance to the deeper floors below. Walking to the edge of the plateau, he peered down the large cliff face to the ground below. A large pine tree forest stretched every corner of the floor, with veins of rivers running endlessly through the trees. Finn had been watching Yuji's reaction very closely the moment he stepped onto the floor. Although he couldn't tell with the hood blocking his face, Yuji's body language and actions gave away enough. He really doesn't know much about the dungeon. If he passed by through the safety point on floor 18, he should have been used to sights like these. He's either completely new to the dungeon, or knows a secret path that bypasses the safety points. Finn schooled his expressions, knowing he'll need to have a more in-depth conversation with Yuji at some point when they set up their camp. We'll move down and set up our base camp at the opposite plateau, near the entrance to the deeper floors. Finn gave out his orders and the Loki familia silently complied, marching down the path that led down the side of the plateau. And, there, phew, finally, I hate setting up camp so much, Tiona complained as she set down the final bag of supplies near her tent, plopping down onto the ground and onto her back. Thud, wah, hey, watch it, a large bag dropped right next to Tiona's head, kicking up some dust and sending it sprawling onto the side of her face and hair. Maybe you shouldn't be so lazy and get out of the way then. Tiona scoffed at her before scampering off towards Finn. Tiona was going to shout back but saw the swinging of a certain pair of balloons swaying side to side as her sister ran off. She paused then looked down at her body, clicking her tongue. Cow goes moo. Yuji shook his head with a wry smile on his face watching this all go down. He missed this sort of lively ruckus when he wasn't burdened by the pedestal he was put on. Looking around the camp, numerous tents were now erected by the entrance to the deeper floors. Smoke plumes from various campfires started slowly ascending as people began cooking their meals. He turned towards the direction that Finn and Riveria were standing at, the largest tent having finally been set up and dedicated as a meeting point for the higher executives of the Loki familia. Finn noticed Yuji's gaze and with a smile on his face, walked towards him together with Riveria. It's always refreshing to finally set up camp at a safety point. For a brief moment, it helps put your mind off of the dangers the dungeon likes to throw at you. And yet, we can never truly lay our guard down for a moment. Finn and Riveria spoke, glancing towards the entrance that leads down from floor 50 and the guards they had stationed there as a lookout. How far down does it go? Yuji looked beyond the entrance, noting the curve of the cave that led to the steps going down. Riveria turned back to Yuji, its exact depth is undetermined. The deepest floor anyone has explored is the 71st floor, an honor achieved by the Zeus and Hera familia. Ch.5 Camp. Zeus and Hera. Yuji confirmed it now, there really were names based on the mythology from his world that carried over. His first clue was the Loki familia's name from the Norse mythology, but hearing Zeus and Hera it seems the names weren't excluded to just the Norse pantheon. I would like to speak with you privately some more, but do you mind if I took care of some business first? An apologetic smile formed on Finn's face as he looked at Yuji and towards Ace. Yuji nodded in understanding. It's all right, I understand. Do you mind if I grab some food in the meantime? Go right ahead, you're free to eat, drink or sleep wherever you want in our camp. Finn smiled and walked towards Ace standing next to Lefia, before saying something to the pair. Yuji watched as Ace nodded and followed Finn towards the executive's tent while Lefia followed behind Rivria meekly to somewhere private. As Yuji turned around, he spotted Tiona standing right in front of him, holding a bowl of stew in her hands. Here you go, as thanks for helping us out before. Yuji accepted the bowl as Tiona gestured for them to sit the crates by the campfire. Thanks, what kind of stew is this? He sat down and looked at the stew in his hand. It looked creamy with some chopped carrots and potatoes. There was some type of meat that resembled chicken drumsticks on the sides of the stew and a couple pieces of bread as well soaking up the broth. No idea, but it's really good. Gareth made it earlier, but now he's with Finn and Ace. She pointed back towards the tent. Yuji nodded and then lowered his hood, earning a gasp from Tiona. Quirking his eyebrow, he asked her, "What's wrong?" "Well, I thought you were going to keep that hood up forever, you know." Trying to be the cool and mysterious dungeon savior, she teased him, pointing her fingers rapidly at his head. "Especially with how good-looking you are." He shook his head with a wry smile on his face, "Just old habits. I don't have much of a reason anymore to hide." Is that so?" She dragged out her words leaning back as Yuji tasted the stew, his eyebrows lifting from how surprisingly rich and delicious it tasted. "Hee, I knew you'd like Gareth's cooking." Tiona smirked with a proud look on her face, before quickly staring at Yuji again with narrowed eyes. "What, something on my face?" he asked her, checking his face for any traces of the stew left behind. Tiona took note of the scars on his face, the large gash on his right eyebrow and by the corner of his lips. She also noticed the traces of gray hairs that lined his slicked back pink hair. "You look older than I thought. I figured you'd be around our age, since most adventurers retire early from the dungeon once they've made enough money." She reached down to the side of the crate and handed Yuji some water. He set aside the stew and took the water, thanking her with a nod. "I get what you mean. I don't remember my exact age, but I'm older than I look." He answered her cryptically, giving her a teasing smirk of his own as he took a drink. "Tisk, whatever you say, Gramps," she grinned at her own teasing remark. He breathed out his nose in slight amusement and saw from the corner of his eyes Rivria walking back out into the clearing with Lefia behind her. Lefia seemed to be pondering about something, her eyes downcast as she gripped her staff closely to her body. Rivria's eyes widened slightly seeing Yuji's appearance, but she schooled her expression quickly, giving him a nod. She was about to approach them when a loud shout echoed throughout the camp. "Where's that damn bastard at? I can still smell his scent and my gut is yelling at me he's nearby." "Wait a minute, Bet. You can't just rush right back at him. Quick, hold him back. Let go of me you damn. Why is he full of fighting energy right away after waking up? Please calm down, or the captain is going to get mad." Yuji, Tiona, Rivria and Lefia stared towards the direction of the commotion, seeing the body of Bet walking forward as two people tried to hold him back, with another trailing behind them with a worried look on her face. "Raoul, Cruz, if you don't let go of me right now, I'll pummel you straight into the ground in the next 5 seconds." Bet yelled out, dragging the two people along as they each held onto his legs. Yuji watched with amusement on his face. Although this Bet person seemed to be pretty loud and arrogant with his words, he wasn't actually harming the two people that were trying to pull him back. "Sigh Raoul, Cruz, you can let go. He won't do anything to our guest." Rivria sighed and gestured for the two people to release him. "Well, if you say so," Raoul, a man with short spiky black hair, responded, before letting go of Bet's left leg and standing up. "Oh thank the gods, I didn't want to deal with that any longer." Cruz added on, a young man with gold eyes and medium-length brown hair along with a pair of dog ears and tail of the same color. He quickly got up and moved away from Bet. As the pair moved away, Cruz took one last glance at Yuji before disappearing behind the tents. Now free, Bet grimaced as he stared at Yuji. He marched up towards him and stood a few feet away, just staring down at the seated pink-haired man in front of him. Yuji looked him up and down, seeing the bruise forming on Bet's midsection. It wasn't as bad as he thought it would be, showcasing how tough the wolfman in front of him was. The staring match between the two continued for a beat longer, before a smirk formed on Bet's face. That was one hell of a punch you threw. I don't remember the last time I got my ass handed to me so one-sided ly. Bet slapped his own stomach near the bruise and pointed a thumb to himself. My instincts are telling me to hate you, but I'll settle for begrudging respect instead. I'm Bet Loga, an executive of the Loki familia, known as the Vanargand. Looks like you knocked some sense into him, Riveria interjected as she approached from the side with Lefia. Finn, Ice and Gareth had exited the tent after hearing the commotion and were making their way over too. Tion somehow appeared and followed behind Finn from God knows where. Tisk, shut it, old hag. You know damn well why. Bet crossed his arms and glared at Riveria before stepping towards the campfire and looking at the stew boiling in the pot hanging above it. Well, now's a better time than ever to introduce ourselves to you properly, Finn said as he stood with Gareth to his side. Lefia scooted away from Riveria towards Aze, whispering something to her. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I'm Finn Diemny, first-class adventurer and captain of the Loki familia. Yuji took in his appearance fully, the Palom sporting medium-length scruffy blonde hair and blue eyes, standing at what he guessed to be 3 feet 11, 119 centimeters. My name is Riveria Lyo's Alf, first-class adventurer and vice-captain of the Loki familia. Riveria nodded towards Yuji. Her light green-colored hair was tied up in a ponytail reaching down to her waist, with the same colored eyes. Her ears stood out the most to Yuji, being sharp and long. The name's Gareth Landrock, also a first-class adventurer and top executive of the Loki familia. Gareth introduced himself next, the dwarf with brown eyes and long brown hair along with facial hair of the same color that formed into a beard. I'm Tiona Hiryud, first-class adventurer, executive of the Loki familia. I'm Tion Hiryud, first-class adventurer and also an executive of the Loki familia, but more blessed than my sister. Tiona and Tion both answered one after another, with Tion pressing her well-endowed chest together, giving a pointed stare towards her sister, Tiona, who grinded her teeth back. Both girls have dark green eyes with tan skin. Tion sporting long black hair and a well-endowed physique. Tiona having medium-length black hair with less well-endowed features. Both wore extremely revealing clothing that barely covered their modesty. Yuji could see Finn sighing off to the side at their antics. Lefia noticed Aze was still silent and that everyone else had already introduced themselves, so she spoke up. I'm Lefia Voridis, a second-class adventurer and member of the Loki familia. I'm part of the second string, but I'm training under Miss Riveria. The young teenage-looking girl spoke up, with golden yellow hair and dark blue eyes framing her face, sporting the same pointy ears as Riveria. Riveria had a faint smile on her face after Lefia introduced herself. Yuji then turned to Aze, who the moment she came back out, began staring at him once again. Aze Wallenstein, first-class adventurers and executive of Loki familia. The beautiful young woman introduced herself with her long blonde hair and golden eyes complementing each other. Before Yuji got a chance to respond to all of their introductions, he was interrupted by Aze as she continued speaking. How did you get so strong? Ch.6 lore. Everyone pauses at Aze's straightforward question. Straight to the point, huh? Yuji saw her gaze never wavering, gesturing to Finn that it was fine, seeing the Palom about to speak up. Time, training, and necessity. But in the end, it doesn't matter, Yuji said to her as the others listened in, not hiding their own curiosity. He took a seat back down and picked up the stew again, slowly eating. That's not enough. I need more. Ice stepped forward, getting closer as the campfire flickered, sending embers floating off. Finn didn't make any effort to intervene, neither did the others as they themselves started gathering around the campfire, picking up more bowls and helping themselves to the food. Yuji kept his eyes on the burning logs, sighing, strength isn't something you chase. It's what's left after everything else is gone. He glanced at Ice from the corner of his eyes. She reminds me of Megumi back in Jujutsu High, but with a much higher drive to getting stronger. Changing internal thoughts from here on out, whenever you see it italicized, like this, consider it an internal thought. At least that was the type of strength I was left with. I wasn't constantly chasing the path to getting stronger. Things just happened to fall into place, whether I wanted it or not. The group listened on as Yuji explained to Aze what he thought about his strength. At some point, I pushed to the side what I should have been doing, taking the easy way out. The faint figure of his grandfather's back in the hospital facing away from him surfaced to the front of his mind. Helping people. The group stayed silent as they took in his words, feeling the emotional weight he put behind the last two words. Helping people, Ace repeated his words quietly to herself. Like a hero, she added on, a very faint glimmer shone behind her eyes. Ha, no, never, I'm the furthest thing you could consider as a hero. Yuji replied with a slight chuckle. As fast as that glimmer came to her eyes, it vanished just as quickly. Say, what familia are you from then? Or are you still keeping that a secret? Tiona asked. Nice tact you have there, cutting board. Tiona mocked her with a sneer. Ha, did I hear a cow mooing down in the dungeons? Tiona turned and cracked her knuckles, standing up to face her sister as she did the same. Ahem, the two quickly paused and separated, with Tiona whistling while Tiona blushed, a hand covering her mouth. Finn shook his head, sorry, but Tiona did ask a question that's been on everyone's mind. Would you mind telling us? Yuji observed the group, seeing all of them sporting the same curious look, with nothing malicious hiding beneath their gazes. Well, would it be bad if I said I wasn't part of a familia? Do you know of the saying that a pin drip in a quiet forest could be heard from miles away? No, me neither. What? Tiona and Bet yelled out at once. Finn, Gareth and Rivria having looks of disbelief on her face alongside Lefia. Ace was now even more confused than ever. Wait, what about your previous familia then? Who were you with before you left them? Finn quickly asked, hoping the impossible contradiction that was rising in the back of his mind was wrong. Yuji shrugged as he finished his stew and dropped the empty bowl onto the ground next to him. Never been part of one. Is it like a guild or a gathering of adventurers like you guys? He asked them. Do you know of the saying that a pin drip in a quiet forest could be heard from miles away? No, yeah you do, I wrote it a few lines up. The only noise that played out was the crackle of the campfire between the members of the Loki familia. Finn and Rivria exchanged looks with one another, as Rivria turned back to Yuji and asked him in a louder tone than usual. Do you know what Falna is? Like, flora and fauna. Yuji answered back, which caused the group to be left even more dumbfounded than before. No, Falna, or sometimes it is also called blessing, is given by the gods and goddesses to the members of their familia. Finn explained in place of Rivria. I don't know what to tell you, I have nothing of the sort. Never joined a familia or got this Falna thing you guys are talking about. Yuji's expression never changed or wavered in front of them. To the group's ears, what he was saying was that he managed to knock out Bet, a level 5 adventurer in one punch without the aid of a god or goddess's Falna. This can't be real. Bet tilted his head back, covering his face with both hands. If word got out he got his ass handed to him by a Falnalist dude, he would be made a laughing stock throughout Orario, and probably beyond. I'm guessing these are a big deal to you guys? Yuji asked with a wry look on his face, seeing Bet's reaction and the dumbfounded look on sisters' faces. Ace meanwhile felt like her entire world shattered. She had spent years training and fighting with the aid of the Falna granted to her by Loki, using it to get stronger and stronger. Yet, Yuji was able to beat someone like Bet without the aid of a Falna. Sigh yes, you could even say they make up the foundation of what it means to be an adventurer, within and outside of Orario. Finn said as he took a seat on a crate as well. The others started eating, throwing glances to Finn and Yuji as their captain began giving an explanation to the latter. Familia are made up of adventurers and supporters headed by a god or goddess. They are named after the god or goddess in charge, such as in our case, Loki, who is also the head of the Loki familia. Rivria nodded before adding on, around 1,000 years ago, the gods and goddesses started to come down to the lower world from heaven. Some have been around since then, and some have only recently come down. The ones that do descend have gotten tired of their mundane lives in the heavens. They are forbidden from using their powers, known as arcanum, and have the same physical abilities as normal people, or even weaker. However, there was one exception that the gods and goddesses were entitled to. Falna, Yuji answered her, and everyone nodded their heads as one. Rivria continued on, the gods and goddesses bestow Falna to adventurers to bring forth heroes. Those with a Falna gain a superhuman physical prowess upon being bestowed with it and can gather excelia to raise their status to grow stronger. Hey, pass the salt, would ya? Falnas are represented by what is known as status, which is the Falna itself set as various parameters that we can understand. Get it yourself, it's by your feet. It is made up of basic abilities, development abilities, magic, skills and the overall level of the person it is engraved upon. Can I have seconds? They manifest themselves as a form similar to a tattoo, as a mass of text with all its characteristics detailed, as well as the corresponding familia's emblem. Why the hell is my water spicy? Can you be quiet? Riveria stood up, her eyebrow twitching as she shouted at Tion, Tiona, Gareth and Bet, who each froze and smiled sheepishly. What the hell, this is totally like a video game's status screen. Yuji couldn't help but think to himself, following along with the explanation. Finn and Riveria turned to Bet, who went back to shoveling food down his throat, but stopped feeling their gazes on them. Tisk, just this once. Why me, of all people? Bet complained, wiping his mouth and putting his bowl down. He stood up and turned around, taking off his jacket to display his back to Yuji. Yuji saw a large tattoo engraved upon Bet's entire back. It took on the face of a jester or a clown, whichever worked, with a top hat and a wide toothy grin. Usually a familia member's Falna is a closely guarded secret, but it is all written in hieroglyphs, the language of the gods, so no mortal can actually decipher and read them. Finn finished explaining as Bet clicked his tongue and put his jacket back on, now put into a bad mood having to expose his Falna to an outsider. That's why it is highly unusual to find someone as strong as you without a Falna. Finn said, earning a nod from Riveria. However, it is possible to obtain superhuman power without a Falna, but the last recorded instances of those traced back to the ancient times. Those with Falna, however, gain access to better magic, skills and so forth, so we ultimately excel as the definitive betters. Riveria added on and concluded. Alright, I understand the gist of what you told me. So according to Riveria at the end there, it's not totally impossible for someone like me to exist, right? Yuji asked, pointing towards Riveria. Well, technically, yes. Finn slowly spoke out. Yuji clapped his hand and shrugged, then I don't see what the problem is. I think you guys are just too used to the norm, so someone like me threw you for a loop. Thank God, well, gods, that there was a convenient and ready-to-use excuse for being out of the norm. Yuji mentally released a sigh of relief. Teach me, please. Ace quickly stood up again and walked over next to Yuji, staring down intensely at the man. Yuji and Finn both sighed at the same time, something they both noticed and couldn't help but chuckle. Ch7, Assault, pushing aside the matter with Ace for now, promising to have a proper chat with her once they leave the dungeon. Yuji watched on from the side as Finn gathered the rest of the familia members together around a campfire. He looked up at the ceiling and couldn't help but marvel at how it had turned night in the dungeon, seeming as though the dungeon was mirroring the day-night cycle outside. Let's review our plan moving forward, Finn said as he sat down to look at all the members of the Loki familia gathering around the campfire by him, forming a large circle. The expedition's goal to trailblaze unexplored areas of the dungeon remains unchanged. We were planning on pushing towards floor 59, but the horde of monsters the dungeon threw at us today reduced the number of our supplies more than what I would have liked. He rested his elbows on his knees and leaned forward. Instead, our main priority is now completing our quest. The one issued by Dian Sect Familia? Tion asked, sitting to Finn's left. Yes, they want us to collect a large amount of water from the Cadmus springs on floor 51. Unfortunately, each spring only allows for a small yield, so to be as efficient as we can, we'll split into 2 small parties and head for 2 springs at once. Finn grabbed a stick near his feet and pointed towards the first few people. Quest Party 1 will consist of Tion, Tiona, Ice and Lefia. Quest Party 2 will be Bet, Gareth, myself and Raoul. You want me to come? Raoul quickly interjected but was ignored. I should go with the captain. Tion quietly complained. Why was I chosen to go over Miss Riveria? Lefia quickly asked in a slight panic. I shall remain behind to protect the camp. Riveria calmly stated. Lefia, you are the one who shall eventually follow in my footsteps. You shall go in my stead. That's true, but, Lefia muttered out, looking unsure of herself. Yuji couldn't help but raise an eyebrow seeing her demeanor. It was sort of refreshing seeing someone so timid compared to the usual confident adventurers. But then again, could she really afford to stay like that if she wanted to go deeper in the dungeon? As for our newest guest, I don't want to impose, but it would leave me with a sense of ease if you also stayed behind to protect the camp. Finn requested Yuji. Sure, I don't mind, it's no skin off my back. I'm freeloading off you guys right now anyway, Yuji said with a light tone, causing a few faint chuckles to spread amongst the people. Finn nodded in appreciation and continued on. Cadmus Springs got its name for a reason. A Cadmus dragon calls it home. With the exception of floor bosses, it's the strongest monster ever discovered in the dungeon. Even so, I strongly believe all of you will absolutely succeed. Yes, sir, each of the people assigned to the quest parties sang out. With those words, everyone parted and headed off to their tents to sleep. Gareth walked up to Yuji and slapped his back, though Yuji didn't budge an inch from the dwarf's strong physique. You can stay with me if you haven't picked a tent yet. I don't snore. Sure, I'm a pretty heavy sleeper anyway, thanks, Yuji said as he followed behind, watching the others part ways and head to their own tents. He spotted Raoul gesturing at him from the corner of a tent, and when he turned to face him, the man mouthed out some words towards him, resembling the words, "He snores SSS." Yuji chuckled and waved him good night, entering the tent. Gareth had already crashed into his bedding on one side of the tent, leaving the other free. Yuji laid down on the other and got comfortable, well, as much as one could on some sleeping bags stacked on a wooden frame. Wonder what the city is going to be like once we head back up again. With those last thoughts, he shut his eyes and drifted off to sleep. I'm never sleeping in the same tent as you ever again. Ha ha ha, come on, it's not that bad. Gareth laughed as he put on his equipment, getting ready to leave to fulfill Familia's quest. Yuji stood near the entrance towards floor 51 and below, watching the group prep themselves. PFF'd, I tried warning you. Raoul covered his mouth, stifling a laugh. After a much-deserved rest last night, the group was ready to head out once again, eager to finish their quest and head back home to the surface. Alright, we'll head down together before splitting up at the first intersection that'll come up. Riveria, hold down the fort until we get back. Finn addressed everyone, turning to Riveria at the end. Even if we're in a safety point, anything can happen in the dungeon. Don't worry, we'll handle anything that comes our way if the need arises. Riveria stated, giving Lefia a look and an encouraging nod. The girl in turn gripped her staff and bowed back, turning to go join Ace and the rest of her group. Ace gave Lefia a smile, glancing at Yuji one final time before the group set off. Finn stayed back slightly. If anything does happen, I'll be counting on you to help Riveria out. Nothing's going to happen with me here. Stop worrying and head out. Yuji gave him a reassuring smile and the Palom reciprocated, leaving to join the quest parties. Well, now we just wait for them to get back. You know how long they'll take. Yuji stayed watching as their figures disappeared down the steps towards floor 51, with Riveria by his side. At most, I presume they would take 7 hours. They will only be on floor 51, so there is no need to bring any camping supplies with them. They can always come back and continue again tomorrow if today yields unsatisfactory results. Riveria stared at the dark entrance for a moment before turning to leave, heading back to the camp. She turned back towards Yuji and asked, "What will you do in the meantime?" "Well, might as well explore the rest of this floor while I wait. Got nothing else to do anyway." Yuji stretched his arms behind his back, a gust of wind blowing from who knows where and ruffling the few loose strands of hair on his head. Tiona mentioned there was a spring nearby, right? I'll wash up a bit before looking around. If something happens, just yell out, really loudly. He turned to leave, waving his farewell to Riveria as he walked to the steep drop by the edge of the plateau, giving her one final look over his shoulder and dropping straight down. Sigh, well, at least he's not as troublesome as Bet. Riveria muttered and walked towards the inner camp and began giving out her orders. Close the formation, don't let a single drop of that liquid through. Riveria's shout echoed across the plateau and smoke bellowed from the remnants of various melted tents along the edges of the base camp. Hundreds upon hundreds of Virga, green caterpillar-like monsters that could shoot out dissolving liquid swarmed up the side of the plateau the base camp was situated upon. They had burst through the ground near the base of the plateau and began rushing up towards the Loki familia. From far away, a long stretch of green mass piled from the bottom of the cliff face, heading straight up the side and converging at the top around the camp. The defenders all huddled together, forming a tight encirclement, keeping the wounded and supporters near the back and middle, away from the front where the Virga pushed against. Piles of melted shields and pieces of armor strewn the ground, a result of taking a direct hit that these species of monsters shot out. Lean, Amos, Liddy, take the injured to the rear. Anyone who can still move, grab pots and cutting boards, everything and anything that can be used as a shield. Prevent that liquid from getting through. Riveria handed out her orders as she stood behind the frontliners who were all desperately holding the enemy back with their large shields. Looking over her shoulder, she could see the supporters tending to the critically wounded with the elixirs they had on hand. Finn, Ace and the others are due back from their quest any moment. We must hold out until they arrive. One of the Virga at the front spat out its liquid towards her, which prompted one of the men at the front to quickly lift their shield to block. The blast struck the shield, but it was quickly dissolving as the horrid stench spread out and sizzled. It's melting. Drop it, damn it, pass me another. The supporters quickly passed more shields, or whatever could substitute as one, towards the front constantly whenever it was needed. Archers, loose. Riveria turned and ordered the few archers at the back. But Miss Riveria, this is the last round. An elf dressed in light leather armor holding a bow said back, holding her last arrow between her fingers and on her bow. Her friends besides her are doing the same. Irrelevant, loose. Heeding her orders, the archers fired off their last volley of arrows, striking and killing a score of Virga that were climbing over its own allies, causing them to roll back and knock others down with them. The situation only got worse as the fight went on. We can't hold them, there's not enough time for casting. Ah, my leg, there's more of them, are there no more shields? Somebody help me, I can't see, damn it all. The bleeding won't stop, bring out more elixirs, now. We're running low, we only have half a craft left. Throughout the chaos, Riveria stood still, her breathing slowly gaining speed as her eyes darted left and right, looking at the faces of the terrified members of the Loki familia. A flag bearing the Loki familia emblem flapping behind her high up, with its edges singed and dissolving from the Virga's stray shots. I told you to shout for me, didn't I? Riveria was pushed out of her stunned state, snapping back to reality as she turned to the voice. She looked up and saw Yuji standing on top of the flagpole with one foot, the wind pushing his hair back as he stared down at her with a straight face, hands in the front of his jacket's pockets, as though all the shouting and suffering from the people below him did not enter his ears. We see the fit bro, get down already. Can't utilize the sun-kissed technique since there's no sun. Yuji, Riveria could only say his name, shame marring her face as she bit her lip. Please, assist us. All you had to do was ask. He gave her one last glance from the corner of his eyes before turning to face the swarm of Virga. The Virga seemed to become more violent the moment Yuji had appeared, throwing themselves forward into the shields and even impaling their own bodies on weapons. I'll be taking a page out of your book, brother, Yuji stated as he lifted his right hand up in an open grasp. One of the support members behind him looked up, but then saw the sight far above Yuji and the rest of the people here. What's that? Is that all, blood? His voice attracted the attention of others close by, including Riveria. They each subsequently looked up and for a moment, forgot about the chaotic fight they were in. Hundreds of tiny red orbs floated high up in the sky, blanketing the sky almost like a long stretch of red carpet if not for the flicker of light passing between them. How? When? Riveria muttered out as she stared at the orbs. Magic of this scale always required a long cast time, but she hadn't heard any at all. He could have said his chant before appearing before her, but she had a feeling deep down this wasn't the case, as illogical as that was. Choshinsei, supernova, ch. 8 new threat, back to the camp, full speed. Within the labyrinth that consisted of floor 51, the two quest parties ran back towards the camp at full speed. They had encountered a swarm of monsters appearing and ambushing them, but the biggest outlier was the direction the Virga they had encountered was coming from, towards base camp. As the group ran back at full speed, they quickly reached the entrance to floor 51 and the moment they exited, they all paused. The camp, Tion cried out as looks of apprehension and shock grew on everyone's faces. They could see hundreds of the Virga climbing side of the plateau towards the top where the base camp was. Looking past the swarm, they saw plumes of smoke rising up into the sky from the top, but from their distance and angle, they couldn't see the state the base camp was in. Awaken, Tempest, Aze, wait, Ariel, with the chant Aze, body exploded with a gust of wind forward, kicking up dirt and grass behind her as she flew towards the base camp. Damn it, couldn't stop her if I tried. Finn gave himself a self-deprecating smile before quickly running forward. Tiona, bet. Let's go, he commanded the fastest members of their party, running after Aze's back. However, all of them quickly paused, including Aze who had stopped a fair distance away from them. A large shadow was cast over the swarm of Virga, as numerous red orbs congregated above the plateau, stretching from the top to the edge where the Virga were crawling out from. What the hell is that? Bet uttered, eyes widening at the sight. Is that, from Yuji? Tiona voiced out to herself. Finn thought back to the fight the previous day, the red beams that had saved them flashing through his mind. The orbs he was looking at held the same color. I think so, Finn said quietly. Right after he answered, the red orbs exploded all at once with a crushing violence. Each orb that exploded shot out multiple thin red beams straight down, piercing through all the Virga present and digging deep into the ground beneath them. The sound of the beams impacting flesh and the hard surface of the floor reverberated throughout the floor, like a series of loud fireworks striking all in quick succession. A large amount of dust was kicked up from the sheer impact the beams shot through the Virga and into the ground, quickly obscuring the base, side and top of the plateau. Let's keep moving, we can't afford to waste time standing here and watching, Finn quickly said, kickstarting the others' brains as they resumed their run back up. Ace stood stock still for a moment, her eyes ingraining the sight in her eyes, ranging from the scene of the mass of red orbs to the resulting aftermath. She quickly got her wits back and rushed forward, still under the influence of her boost. She quickly passed by the cloud of dust that started to slowly settle back down, running up the side of the cliff face and jumping towards the flat top. Coming to a landing, the first thing she noticed was Yuji standing on top of the flag that held Loki Familia's emblem. She then noticed how quiet everything was, as everyone kept their eyes on where she assumed the fight had been taking place. Rivria was the first to notice her arrival, turning to see her, a look of relief on her face. Ace moved towards the group, looking over the injured and towards Yuji, who put his hands back in his pockets and hopped down. Did he? She asked Rivria, who knew what she was asking. Yes, thanks to him, we were able to hold out. She looked over to Yuji, before stepping towards him. Thank you, it appears the worst is behind us, but with the injured we have, this failure is taken upon me, as the one in charge of defending the camp. Yuji nodded at her, looking towards the wounded and after a moment, sighed. Well, don't want Gramps being disappointed, he whispered to himself, but Rivria caught his words. Before she could inquire what he meant, Yuji strode towards the person closest to him. Crouching down, the man was laying back as a supporter held him up, bandaging his head and arm, a grimace on his face as blood was leaking out from the stump where his right hand had been. He was hit by the dissolving liquid right as he was about to swing his sword down, dissolving both the weapon and his hand promptly. Yuji held his hand out and before anyone could say anything, a wave of blue energy flowed and stretched out from his hand and covered the man's body as he utilized reverse curse technique on him. At a visible rate under their eyes, the main body that sported cuts and bruises were quickly being healed. Yuji quickly reached out and tore the bandage that covered the man's stump. Wait, that's Dangaro, huh? The supporter helping the man was quickly left speechless. Nerves, muscles, tissue, blood vessels, bone and skin quickly grew out from where the man's stump was, before forming a completely brand new hand, as though no injury had ever taken place. Finn and the others had arrived right at the end, witnessing the tail end of Yuji's healing magic. Wow, it feels normal. Like a good normal. I don't feel any pain whatsoever. The man became more and more animated, looking over his entire body and flexing his right hand, twisting it left and right. No chant, unprecedented healing magic as well, Rivria whispered quietly to herself as Finn walked up next to her, watching Yuji and the man sporting a wide grin on his face. Who are you, Yuji Itadori? Bring the others to me, I'll heal them all one by one. For ones that can't walk, lead me to them. The supporters in charge of looking after the injured quickly complied, bringing forth the rest of the injured, who were each promptly healed one by one. It took only 5 minutes for everyone to be completely healed. The only indication that any injury had ever occurred was the slight scarring left behind from cuts or gashes. Limbs that were fully dissolved fully healed with no scarring left behind. The Loki familia's supporters who had dragged crates out of the camp and supplied the forward fighters with weapons were happily embracing and celebrating the victory. Do you need a rest? You should be pretty low on mind after healing that many people in a row. Finn stepped forward and asked with a worried tone. It's fine, this much is nothing to me. Yuji reassured him, looking over the smiles and gazes of appreciation the people he helped heal gave him. Yuji quickly turned to the side, pushing past the group of people and standing on the edge of the plateau, his gaze locked onto a point of the forest. Rivria was the next one to notice, quickly moving after him. What is that? She could see the presence of something large and quick, burrowing its way up from the deeper floors straight up towards the floor they were on. Noticing how alert Yuji and Riveria were, Finn quickly ordered out, "Everyone, move back to the middle and away from the edges. You guys, with me." He indicated for the members of the previous quest party to follow him as they gathered besides Riveria and Yuji. "Whatever it is, it's moving fast for its size." Yuji glanced down at Finn out of the corner of his eye. "I hope you have enough of that water for your quest." "We do, there's no need for us to." Finn was interrupted as the ground beneath them rumbled, similar to an earthquake as the entirety of floor 50 was shaking back and forth, the trees swaying along and creaking from the pressure. From the middle of the forest ground, a large winged caterpillar towered over the forested floor. Its large green body sported what looked like cannon appendages along the length of its body. It has 4 wings, 2 on either side of its body. Its round head had no eyes, but long purple tentacles flowed and tangled between each other behind its head. Quote, "Did that come up from a lower floor too?" Tione was the first to react. "Destroying everything in its path, probably." Tiona responded back with the same stunned look on her face. "Don't be stupid," Bet quipped back to the two. The new monster had to be at least 60 meters tall. It was at least twice as big as the largest of the monsters they had been fighting against. Raoul was looking shaken as the accumulated sweat on his body turned his shirt a dark, damp shade. "Is that a person?" Most of its body was shaped the same as the caterpillar monsters, with the exception of one major difference. On top of its head at the forefront of its face was a distinctly human torso and head sticking out. It held no eyes, instead sporting bright purple spots where they would have been on a human face. The curves of its human torso was distinctly female, its arms and legs having been fused behind its back in the rest of the large caterpillar's body. The belly didn't appear round enough to be considered as pregnant, but the skin around it was pitch black and pulsating. "Those sacs, some of the monsters we fought had similar features. If we didn't kill them fast enough, they exploded. If we killed something of that size like the others," Raoul spoke up as his voice shook with each word uttered. One thought echoed in everyone's mind. If something of that size were to be killed, all of the dissolving acid it had in its body would flood the area. Their eyes locked onto the numerous, large sacs that contained enough of the acid to turn the rest of the floor into a bubbling swamp. An explosion of the size the monster carried might be powerful enough to completely destroy what was left of this floor. If they all attacked together, slaying the monster wouldn't be that big of an issue. The problem rose from the fact that everything else nearby would be in danger. Gareth hefted his weapons, adjusting his helmet. "For something that big, I bet we'll need to hit the magic stone, its life force in one clean swipe. So where do we even start stabbing, huh?" Bet replied back with sarcasm, his eyes scanning over the monster's large body. The human head of the huge monster faced Loki familia from across the forested plains. Quote, "Its 4 wings opened wide as specks of light filled the air. Colors of red, orange, green and blue floated from the monster and spread out. It released a kind of spore or pollen. The swarm of colors flowed across the forest and plains. Years of training and adventuring suddenly warned everyone as a cold chill shot up their spines. All of the higher-ranked adventurers took a step back instinctively, while Yuji remained standing at the forefront. All at once, millions of tiny explosions went off at once. Kya, Lefia felt the heat of the blast reaching all the way to their positions, causing her to scream out the top of her lungs. Splintered trees and cracked earth were sent flying and went up in flames in an instant. "Those spores, each single speck inside the cloud is a bomb," Riveria stated with a grimace on her face as she watched the smoldering forest below. "All groups, full retreat," Finn called out to Loki familia, as the gazes of everyone immediately shot to his location. Finn, however, was completely focused on the female worm. "Break down the camp as fast as you can and start making your way towards the exit." Everyone turned to look at the large distance they had to cover to reach the opening that led back up and out of floor 50. "What? Come on, Finn, are you serious? Are we just going to ignore that thing?" Bet and Tione each voiced their objections. Their pride as first-rate adventurers and a member of the strongest dungeon-dwelling familia in Orario urged them to stay and fight. The monster had made its way up to this safety point. There was nothing stopping it from going even higher, and the casualties that other adventurers would have to suffer would be catastrophic. Finn clenched his fists. "I don't like this any more than you do. But we need to slay it and do damage control at the same time." Easier said than done. "I know." Finn dreaded the orders he had to give out. He knew he had to do so, but it still pained him. "Ace, take it." So, you're mainly worried about the fatal aftermath that could follow after killing that thing. Before Finn could tell Ace to hold it back while the rest of the Loki familia retreated to the exit, Yuji interjected, his eyes having never left the monsters. Finn turned to Yuji, looking up at the profile of the tall man in silence. Yes, do you have something to stop it from flooding the whole floor? Finn didn't care about his pride as the captain of the Loki familia, their safety was his biggest priority. Even if it meant having to ask someone else to risk their life to save them, he would do so without hesitation. I do. That was the last thing everyone heard as Yuji's body disappeared without a sound. Where the hell did he go? Bet looked around trying to see a trail or silhouette of the man. He's on top of the monster. Following Riveria's gaze, everyone directed their eyes to the top of the monster, and they could see Yuji standing on top of the thing, looking down at his feet. I don't know what the hell you are, but I have a way of finding out. The female monster froze, feeling Yuji stand on its head. Its instinct screamed at itself to flee or fight back, but the feeling of dread crippled its movements, halting it in place. Raising his right hand, Yuji slowly crossed his middle finger over his index, forming his teacher's sign. Ryaiki Tenkai, Domain Expansion. Author's note: you might be wondering why Yuji is performing Gojo's hand sign for his domain. Well, first remember how Sukuna was also able to pop his domain by using Gojo's hand sign. This shows that the hand sign sorcerers use is not limited to what they are most familiar with, granted they have a really high mastery over domain expansions. Second, the most important tools that a sorcerer can have are their hands and mouth. Yuji's hand sign would use both hands leaving them occupied, so to be more efficient using just one hand sign like Gojo's is more efficient. Ch9 journey back up. Instantly, Yuji and the monster were enveloped by darkness. The female monster blinked and next thing it knew, it found itself in what looked like a town. There was one thing that most intelligent monsters in the dungeons share, and that was the desire to reach the surface. Its large head swiveled, looking at the unfamiliar landscape and buildings, as well as the open air. The figure of the man that stood atop of its head had long since disappeared. From the perspective of the Loki familia, they watched as Yuji's figure raised his hand, and then a dark sphere enveloped the both of them, floating in the air like an immovable anomaly. Inside the domain, Yuji appeared and stood near a playground he used to frequent when he was a child. His domain gave him the breakdown of what the monster in front of him was. Not exactly a soul, but something similar. Whenever it dies, it gets cycled back into the dungeon, waiting until it can be revived again. The monster heard Yuji talking to himself, turning and quickly sending a cloud of spores towards him, engulfing the entire town. However, in the moment they had appeared, the spores each disintegrated in the air as though millions of little slices tore them apart until nothing was left. You ain't worthy of having my domain be explained to you, just die. As his words echoed out throughout the domain, the monster was sliced and cut apart 100,000, millions of times over and over again. The dissolving fluid inside of its sacs was no exception. It kept being cut down as Yuji imbued the sure hit effect of his domain with dismantle and cleave until the only trace left behind was the magic stone, dropping onto the ground. Common misconception, but cleave isn't just for people with cursed energy. Instead, the damage output can be scaled based on their cursed energy. It can still hit anything. Walking over, Yuji picked up the stone and noticed it held a much stranger appearance as opposed to the other magic stones that were dropped by the monsters they had come across. Finn or Riveria might know more about this thing. He pocketed the stone and the domain broke down, leaving him to fall down to the forest below. Landing on the ground, he looked up to where the Loki familia were, seeing that they were making their way over to the exit. With a kick off the ground, he disappeared, leaving behind no trace as he met up with the Loki familia once again. Yo, catch! Yuji suddenly appeared before the Riveria and Finn, who were both overseeing the retreat towards the upper floors. Caught off guard, Riveria fumbled slightly as her hand knocked the magic stone Yuji threw towards him, before catching it firmly. Riveria looked at the magic stone in her hand, frowning as she did so. Looks like you took care of another problem we faced. I can't thank you enough for your support, Finn said, walking up to Yuji and directing his gaze to where the monster had been, along with that odd orb Yuji summoned. What the hell was that, anyway? All I saw was a giant black ball floating in the sky, and then it broke away with no trace of the monster. Bet curiously asked him, scratching the back of his head in irritation at having to rely on someone else to save their asses. A domain expansion, I just isolated it from the outside world and dealt with it. Yuji vaguely answered him. I can explain more later once we get out of this place, if you're still curious. Tisk, I don't care, but those the two nerds and Ace might. He clicked his tongue and pointed towards Ace, who was now staring at Yuji with an even bigger fervor in her eyes. I for one would very much be interested in learning more about what it is you did. Riveria promptly replied, putting the matter of the magic stone aside for now. Good, once we head out, I'll invite you to stay at our Loki familia's place so we can sort out the compensation and division of rewards. For now, we're forced to end the expedition early due to the extensive loss of material and weapons. Yuji looked over the supply chain that the supporters were carrying, noticing a severe lack of weapons and equipment compared to before. He even spotted one of the frontline adventurers holding a pan in place of a mace. How long would it take for us to head back up? Well, if we focus on only heading back up, I'd say maybe 12 days or less. It would have taken longer if you didn't help heal the wounded. Finn cast a grateful look towards Yuji, before addressing the entire group. Alright, everyone, I'm calling an official end to our expedition. It's time to head home. Cheers erupted throughout the expedition members, some of the exhausted-looking people letting out sighs of relief. Looking on, Yuji couldn't help but smile, taking in the novel experience of being part of a dungeon expedition, as short as it was. The dungeon layout would dramatically change on certain floors. The standard design started back on floor 1, and then became steadily more complex with new topography including forests, ponds, deserts, and many other areas. Yuji marveled at the unique structure that comprised the dungeon's layout, completely affirming in his own mind that something like this wouldn't exist back on his own planet. The terrain that he and the Loki familia were currently making their way through was a series of cave-like systems, with rocks jutting out from the walls and large holes leading to other passageways. He also had to watch out for the occasional hole in the ground, lest he fell down to a lower floor below. They had traveled up from the deeper floors all the way to the middle levels, the 17th floor. We could have kept going. I didn't have enough food. Enough already. You're really starting to test my patience here. But we worked so hard just to get to floor 50. Tion scolded her sister, having been forced to listen to the same repetitive complaints over and over as Tiona hadn't stopped voicing her boredom the entire way up. How many times does Captain have to explain it to you? Those monsters destroyed almost all of our weapons and food. Even if we wanted to continue, there wasn't enough left. But there's food everywhere down here. We could have figured it out. Without weapons or items, they don't grow down here. Especially weapons, since all we have left are just pieces of junk. Tion continued her scolding, gesturing to the fact Tiona didn't have anything left at all. Everybody had been forced to wear badly damaged armor and carry weapons that were prone to breaking at any moment. Their edges had become dull without any way to maintain them. All their armor had holes or large gashes on the plating, one big hit and it could break apart. Equipment like these were always prone to breaking down during long missions, with the exception of superiors. Ah, this sucks. Just getting all the way up to floor 50 was long and hard enough already. Tiona complained and walked on with her arms behind her back, strolling over to Yuji's side, nudging him with her shoulder. You think so too, right? I bet with you tagging along, we could have kept going past floor 60, maybe even up to 70. Haha, maybe, but I would rather head back up to the surface and relax. He wanted nothing more than to finally sleep with a proper roof over his head, kick back and relax for once, enjoying this new world he was in. Blay, you really do sound like a grandpa when you say things like that. Tiona teased, before skipping towards Ace and Lefia. All because of that monster, we had to leave, so, what was it exactly? A few moments passed before Lefia answered, don't know, I've never read or heard about that monster appearing in the dungeon before. All we can say is that it was an undiscovered species, but that magic stone it dropped is quite strange. Tion continued on, glancing towards Riveria, who had the stone in her pouch. Magic stones come in many different shapes and sizes, but the one thing they had in common was their dark purple color. The stone Yuji had retrieved, however, had a bright colored core surrounded by a dark purple layer and an even more unusual shiny covering. As they all pondered, the group arrived at a wide room. The passageways up here were a lot narrower than the deeper floors. With the large amount of equipment they were carrying, they had to split up the groups into two before entering the floor they were on. It was a lot harder to coordinate a large group in such tight and narrow spaces if they were to get swarmed by monsters again. Rivria was in charge of the forward group, which included the two Amazonian twins, Ace, Lefia, Bet, Yuji and 20 adventurers together. Finn and Gareth stayed back and were with the second group, following behind them from a distance. Everyone was exhausted and tired as they headed back home, but the ones having it the worst were the low-level supporters who had been tasked with carrying the baggage and carts that had survived. Linny, want some help? Huh, no, I'm fine. Ace had approached a human girl and offered her some assistance with the baggage. The supporter quickly rejected the offer. She couldn't let a first-class adventurer do something as mundane as carrying the bags. Yuji had noticed how the rest of the Loki familia treated Ace. Her strength and reputation being very well known between them, and not to mention her detached way of handling things, many members of the familia were at a loss at how to interact with her. Honestly, from my perspective, she just seems extremely socially awkward. Then again, they probably respect her strength and reputation a lot, so combined with her personality, it doesn't paint a pretty picture. Yuji ruminated to himself as he walked up behind Linny and lifted the comically large backpack off her back. Waek, Itadori, you don't have to do that. Linny quickly protested, trying to reach and pull back the bag. It's fine, I'm more than capable of defeating this bag monster. He gave her a grin and tousled her hair before walking past, slinging the bag onto his back, leaving Linny behind as a blushing and panicked mess. Tisk, don't know why you would even bother with them. The runts ain't worth it. Bet clicked his tongue, walked up and kicked the supporter lightly on the side of her hip as a way to shoo her away, coming up next to him. He turned and looked back at Ace as well. Same goes to you, Ace. Just let them do their job, it's all they're worth down here. Even as strong as you are, you don't know shit, huh? Just talking with weaklings is a waste of time, much less helping them out. Ace listened quietly as Bet cocked his head back and was about to laugh, but Yuji slapped the back of his head, sending him falling flat on his front. Ah, damn it, what's the big idea? With your reasoning, I should have just left you all behind then, huh? Yuji said, walking over Bet's back and over him, causing the man to let out a grunt as he got up and patted the dirt off his body. Yay, you could've, and it would be well within your right as someone strong. Yuji shook his head, remembering what Rivria told him before about Bet, describing him ironically as a man who wanted to be misunderstood. Once you're the strongest, then you can decide how to treat others. For now, stop being a tsundere, it's embarrassing for a guy your age. Why you? Bet flustered, his eyes twitching rapidly before shoving his hands in his pants and storming him. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing, so don't let it get to you. Remember, helping people isn't wrong. Yuji looked back at Ace, who looked up and nodded at his words. Don't listen to a word Bet says, Ace. That's the real time waster. Go to hell, woman. You should be helping the runts. Yet there you are, empty-handed. Move your ass. Shut up already. Tiona and Bet kept shouting and bickering with one another, glaring at each other. They were cut off short, as something interrupted them. Oh. The sounds of a distant howl started to echo towards the group and beyond. It wasn't long till the unmistakable grunts of heavy breathing joined them. Although this room and floor had many exits, monsters were constantly being born in each one of them. Ch.10 Minotaurs. Roars that were strong enough to shake the rock under their feet echoed throughout the floor. There was enough power behind the howls to make the average adventurer run out of their boots in fright. The monsters started to appear. Their thick arms and meaty shoulders were illuminated by the lights far above the passageways. Then, sturdy, hoofed feet emerged from under them, cracking against the ground as they came closer. They each sported rusty brown fur that covered their entire bodies. Minotaurs. Linny quickly shouted out, moving to the back to the other supporters as every scrambled together. See, they came to shut you up. Tiona elbowed Bet. Yay right, dimwit. TCH, sure are a lot of them, though. More Minotaurs kept coming into the room from each exit leading in every second and formed a ring around the forward group of adventurers. Their bloodshot eyes flicked from person to person, chests heaving with excitement, but the moment they eyed Yuji, they paused. Guuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuuu eyebrow from the very man. Did I do something to piss them off? Unlikely. Maybe it's their instincts again, like a certain dog in our party. Rivria said, strolling up to his side after having noticed the fixed gazes the Minotaurs had on Yuji. Rivria, there's a lot of them, more than usual, so can we join in? Tion asked, stretching her arms as she walked forward. Yes, that's fine. Raoul, take command for this battle. Finn believes you are ready to gain some experience. Take note that they seem to be fixated on our guest. Yes, ma'am, you don't want me to step in? Yuji asked, dropping the backpack he was carrying down to the ground, seeing Rivria shake her head. No, these monsters are rated by the guild as the strongest and most dangerous of the dungeon's middle levels. However, Loki Familia's higher class adventurers can deal with this group with no issue. Compared to the deeper floors, the relatively shallow floors of the middle layer are reserved for our lower level adventurers to gain excellia. A's and the others are usually asked to stay back and watch over them. Rivria explained to Yuji, who could see the logic behind them. This is literally just grinding low-level mobs so the weaker party members can gain XP. Supporters, fall back, stay in tight formation and conserve remaining supplies as much as possible. Also, Tionazan, Tionasan, Batesan, the middle levels are for lower-ranking members to gain experience. That's the rule, don't go breaking it. Raoul gave out his orders, turning towards the three people he individually addressed with a nervous but tense stare. Hehehe, no prob, hehe, I know that. A fist fight, better give them a handicap. Tiona and Bet slowly moved forward, cracking their knuckles and stretching their bodies, with no one holding a weapon. As long as they didn't kill the Minotaurs, all was fair game. Muru, one of the Minotaurs at the front looked confused, but then paused as they sensed the ominous intent flowing from the three strolling towards them. The Minotaurs all squeaked out and began to run off, each beast taking off in all directions at the same time. Whaat, no way, they're running, Tiona complained as she was choking out a Minotaur in her left arm, lifting another up into the air with her right. You call yourselves monsters. Bet tugged on the fur of a Minotaur he had beat down, slamming its head against the floor as it lay with a heavily bruised face. Aza's golden eyes widened as she watched in disbelief, while Yuji himself wasn't sure what was happening. After them, all of you. There's no telling what panicking monsters will do. Rivria's shrill voice cut through the chaos. The first-class adventurers were frozen in place for only a moment before launching themselves in pursuit of the Minotaurs. And we were almost home. I'm not good with hand-to-hand combat. Just whack them really hard with that stick you got it? Tion clenched her fist and took off. Bet snapped at Lefia, not one of them had the same look of joy or calm they were sporting just seconds prior. I think I can interfere now, since it's come to this. Yuji stepped forward and put his palms together, pointing the ends of his fingers towards the Minotaurs. Senketsu, piercing blood, red beams of condensed blood shot out at unfathomable speeds, slicing through the air and weaving their way between the adventurers. The beams struck the fleeing Minotaurs, but a large group of Minotaurs started running down to the passageway leading to the 16th floor. Guiding his beam, Yuji was about to pierce through the group, but the wall behind him burst apart, as 5 Minotaurs howled and charged towards him. Turning back, he quickly swiped his hand in a slicing motion behind him. A beat of silence lingered, before each of the Minotaurs lost its head, a large gash forming off the wall behind their dissolving bodies. Ace quickly took off, rushing towards the direction of the Minotaurs that were running down to the lower floors. Tisk, I'll head down as well. Yuji was interrupted as along the walls, more and more Minotaurs ripped themselves and charged him, all aiming and scrambling towards him, frothing at the mouths as a frenzy overtook their minds. Hundreds of Minotaurs swarmed through the room again, giving everyone pause, especially A's and the others as they were pursuing the wayward Minotaurs. Go, leave this floor to me. There might be adventurers in danger if they keep running up. Yuji looked at the group, who all nodded back and continued their pursuit. Form a circle, buy us time for casting. Rivria quickly coordinated with the rest of the adventurers, but Yuji patted her shoulder. You guys need this, Excelia, right? I assume they need to deal the final blow. Yes, that's correct, but I don't think that matters no. Kai, dismantle, splat, The Minotaurs all howled as they crumpled to the ground, their legs and arms all cut off and laying limp on the ground beneath them. All 100+ Minotaurs groaned and writhed pathetically, still trying to crawl towards Yuji's direction, blood pooling along the ground and seeping in the floor beneath them. Yuji walked up to one of the minotaurs, who stared up and bared its rotten teeth at him. "There, some free XP, freshly delivered to us by the lovely dungeon." Yuji raised his foot, and tapped the tip of his shoe against the minotaur's snout. The monster in question was then cleaved apart into tiny meaty cubes, including its magic stone, before promptly turning to black ash. "It doesn't exactly work like that. Falna is a blessing granted by the gods and goddesses. It would be easy for it to identify the merit and actions behind the person." Yuji paused before scratching the back of his head. "Well, I didn't know that." "Whoops." She shook her head. "It's fine. This was more than what we could have handled in a safe manner either way." Yuji shrugged, still feeling a bit put off by his slight blunder. The minotaurs were all succinctly decapitated all at once. For low-level adventures, the excelia they can gain from something like a minotaur is a huge boost to their current stats, but it still had to be done through their own efforts. "Thank you, still, you were thinking about them when you didn't have to," Rivria said quietly, looking on as the adventurers all relaxed the tension in their shoulders, giving Yuji looks of gratitude. Made a big mistake before and had to correct it. Originally I had Yuji chop off the minotaur's legs and arms, but people pointed out that Falna is a lot more balanced than this, and after some thinking they're right, otherwise low levels could just be carried and boosted by high-level adventurers. The sight would have been heartwarming, if the blood from the minotaurs didn't pool the ground around them. "Don't mention it. I don't have this Falna thing you guys got, so I just thought it would have been better for you guys to get some without much effort." Yuji turned towards the direction the others ran off to pursue the wayward minotaurs, up to floor 16. How bad would the repercussions be if they don't manage to catch them? Sigh very. Most adventurers in the middle levels are nowhere near as strong as Loki familia's first-class adventurers. Seeing a stampede of minotaurs would be their worst nightmare. Rivria shook her head, seeing the second group lagging behind them slowly making their way to meet up. "Should even one adventurer be unable to return home due to the minotaurs that we let escape, the guild and other familias would be quick to find out and levy penalties against us." Rivria walked away, intending to meet with Finn halfway and explain the situation. But she left behind one last sentence. "The worst punishment would be losing our sleep from the guilt." Yuji watched as she walked away, looking down at the blood on the ground that pooled towards his shoes, reflecting his face staring back up at him. "You get used to it." 11 unwelcomed gaze. It didn't take long for the wayward minotaurs to be tracked down and killed. Everyone soon regrouped and started to make their way back up to the surface once more. Yuji noticed Bet holding back some laughter, with Ace looking down, deep in thought. He figured something must have occurred when they were chasing down the minotaurs, but it wasn't any of his business. As they got closer to the entrance of the dungeon, Yuji noticed more and more adventurers making their way down. A lot of them stopped and stared at the Loki familia, having recognized the flag with their emblem flying on one of the carts. The last floor they were in was a large circular room leading up to the entrance. Various adventurers and supporters walked down the spiraling steps. At the very top of the room was a beautiful fake azure painting of the sky. The faint, orange hue of the sunset glimmered from the top of the ramp, and Yuji could see the clouds beyond the horizon as they finally exited the dungeon. The cool air blew through and met his skin as his eyes took in the sight of the scenery. A large open field surrounded the dungeon's tower that they exited, with numerous people walking back and forth. They all paused and began talking to themselves, pointing towards the Loki familia. Yuji himself had put his hood back over his head once more. This was the labyrinth city Orario, which held the underground maze known as the dungeon in the middle, with a huge sprawling city surrounding it. Yuji could spot people over numerous races on the large open fields surrounding the dungeon, and on the crowded streets beyond. Dwarves, beastmen, elves, palam, people of all sorts of races were present, donning equipment and armor that he would most commonly see in fantasy movies. The dungeon also held another name that Yuji had heard, Babel. From what he heard, the tower was built on top of the dungeon to prevent the monsters within from escaping. Turning, he looked up at the massive structure that loomed over the rest of the city, stretching far into the sky. "Reminds me of Tokyo Tower. What's inside the top areas of the tower?" Yuji asked Tiona, who was walking nearby, whose ears twitched as she turned to face him, walking backwards. "You've asked the right lady. Ahem, the tower is owned by the guild itself, but the first 20 floors are filled with all sorts of familia businesses, facilities, and a place to exchange some money. Although, The Hephaestus familia owns more than half of those 20 floors. She shrugged and pointed towards the upper portion of Babel. Every floor after are basically private rooms owned by gods and goddesses. Don't know why some would choose to stay there, when you couldn't even live with your familia together. Some just like the sense of power it gives, since the higher up your room is, the more prestige you have amongst the other gods and goddesses. Tion butted in and added in. There's a particularly nasty one at the very top, you'd want to avoid her as best as you can, Yuji. He listened to her words, nodding as his gaze shifted to the top of the tower, watching it silently. The reason he asked in the first place was because he felt that he was being watched, by something or someone, from the very top of the tower. The gaze had been intensifying by the very second, but it wasn't any ordinary gaze. It felt like his very being was being exposed. Yuji lifted his left hand up, pointed at the very top as his eyes stayed wide open, before flicking his finger. Tion and Tiona were both confused by his actions, but saw him putting his hands in his pockets just as quickly. Did you do something? Tiona asked him apprehensively. The last thing they wanted was him starting a war with some gods or goddesses. Not really, just trying to get rid of a bothersome fly buzzing around. Tiona and Tion stared at him for a moment before turning away and continued bickering amongst each other over whatever was bothering the other. At the very top of Babel houses the goddess one of the strongest familia within Orario, the Freya familia. Freya possessed a beauty that was superior and more outstanding even amongst the gods, sporting long silver hair, silver eyes and with the perfect golden ratio. Her clothes were part black and red, exposing most of her stomach and breasts, with 2 flower ornaments in her hair. She stood by a large window that overlooked the city, with a large looming man standing guard behind her, Ottar. There was one important facet to Freya: she possessed what is called a discerning eye, an innate ability to see the color and brilliance of souls. She had just seen a soul so beautiful and pure before, her mood having been uplifted as countless thoughts plagued her head on how she could obtain it all for herself. But then, in the next few hours, It had appeared from within the dungeons. Instinctively, she brought a hand up to her mouth, forcing herself to hold back the bile that rose to her throat as she beheld the souls of whatever the hell that thing was. Her eyes were fixed on Yuji, who had his features obscured except for the lower half of his face, but Freya wasn't concentrating on that. She was staring at the souls that were attached to him. 6 in total, excluding his own. They were pitch black and squirmed constantly like parasites. She could sense the deep-seated hatred that was held within them, a pure disdain for life itself. But that wasn't the end of it. The souls surrounded a larger one, belonging to the man himself. One half of the man's soul was identical to the other 6, but the other half was a blinding blue, contrasting its dark counterparts surrounding it. One more important fact she caught was the soul's age. Although Freya couldn't exactly see the man's face, his lower half looked like they belonged to someone around 30. His soul said otherwise. The man was over 300 years old, and she could tell he would live on for an even longer period. Lady Freya, Ottar asked in concern, moving to her side, but Freya held a hand up, halting him in place. I'm fine, she uttered out, fixing herself and standing back up properly. She was utterly disgusted by this man's soul. It was an abomination, an affront of life and all that she held dear. It made her want to release her arcanum just to smite him down. It made her want to order her familia to squash him right then and there. It made her excited. This was the first time she had ever encountered such a soul in her entire lifetime as a goddess, spanning numerous millennia. Something so twisted and disgusting, yet held a fragment of beauty within, evoked a desire within her. How could she ever pass up on something so unique, so disgusting and so beautiful? Ottar, I want you to find out about the person accompanying Loki familia. I don't care how, just do it. Ottar glanced down and looked at who she was referring to, before nodding. He didn't need to question her or ask why, he just obeyed. At that moment, he narrowed his eyes as he saw the man raise a hand towards him. A chill rose up his spine as he quickly grabbed Freya and turned, shielding her with his back as the glass window shattered apart. Crash, splat, a pool of blood flowed down and stained the red carpet beneath them. Freya's eyes widened. Ottar moved her away from the window, reaching for his weapon and lifting it up in front of him. This proved to be useless, as his weapon was sliced in half and the front of his chest now sported a large diagonal cut. Freya saw the large gash that carved itself into Ottar's front, grabbing his arm and turning her to face him. She ran her hand along the wound, tracing it before turning back to the window. A flesh wound, it was a warning. He could have done more if he wanted. Ottar calmly stated. Not a hint of pain was present on his face as he stepped back and saw Yuji walking away with the rest of the Loki familia. A dangerous prize, Freya licked her lips as her eyes showed, before shooing Ottar away. Go, patch that up and tend to my orders. Ottar bowed and stepped away. In the back of his mind, he replayed that attack over and over, his fist clenched tightly as he walked away. Calm yourself, Ottar, I still want him, Freya's voice echoed from behind, easily able to read his mental state. The man paused for a moment, before relaxing his fist and leaving, shutting the door behind him. Freya kept watching as Yuji walked away into the streets of Orario, no longer using her discerning eye on him. Just how sharp is your bite, you little monster? To be continued.